Hi, my name is Chris and this is Battle Nonsense. Battlefield 4's netcode with its 30Hz tick rate, the 10 updates per second that the client received from the server and the 30 updates per second that the client sent to the server was one of the biggest problems that this game had at launch. Now that we are approaching the release of Battlefield 1, players raised the concern that it might also suffer from netcode issues, which would have a very negative impact on their online experience. But the feedback that DICE received after the release of Battlefield 4 showed them that the netcode was not good enough and something had to be done as soon as possible, which resulted in the launch of the community test environment and an unprecedented massive rework of the netcode spearheaded by DICE LA and supported by the developers of Visceral. Thanks to their efforts, Battlefield 4 now supports any tick rate between 30 to 144 Hz. And while the default tick rate remained at 30 Hz, you can still find many 60 as well as a few 120 Hz servers to play on. So when it comes to the netcode, then Battlefield 1 is built upon a very solid foundation, which you could definitely feel in the closed alpha. And that is despite the fact that the closed alpha build did not even use the latest version of the netcode, as DICE continued to improve it during the last 6 months. So in this video we will take a look at the netcode of the Battlefield 1 closed alpha to find out how good or bad it performs compared to Battlefield 4, and to provide you with some data that we can then compare the improved netcode of the Battlefield 1 beta to. So let's go right to the results of the network delay tests, which shows us how much lag two players experience when they are connected to the same server. The longest measured delay was 103 milliseconds. The average was 78 milliseconds and the shortest measured delay was 65 milliseconds. Which means that the player-to-player net lag is higher than what you get on a 60 Hz Battlefield 4 server. It's even a bit higher than what you get on a 30 Hz Battlefield 4 server. Now, how is it possible that the net lag is higher in the closed alpha of Battlefield 1 than in Battlefield 4 when both build upon the same netcode? What you must keep in mind here is that the performance optimization happens at the end of the development cycle. So the closed alpha of Battlefield 1 has not yet been optimized by DICE, nor did Nvidia and AMD optimize their GPU drivers yet. As a result, you will currently lose a bit more time in the communication process between the client and the server, as well as between receiving the data and rendering the result on your monitor. It's also important to understand that the increased net lag in the Battlefield 1 closed alpha does not mean that the hit registration feels like Battlefield 4's when you play on a 30 Hz server. What makes the difference between 30 and 60 Hz is that you send and receive twice the amount of data, which avoids a lot of issues and makes the game feel a lot smoother and more responsive. So it's really interesting to see the current state of the netcode here, but we have to wait for the beta to get the first conclusive results that allow us to predict how the netcode will perform at launch. Another interesting topic is how much bandwidth the game needs or how much data it sends and receives. So to test that, I played on a full 60 Hz 64-player Battlefield 1 server for an hour. During that time, the game received 99.28 megabytes of data from the server and sent 38.38 megabytes of data to the game server. Then I did the same in Battlefield 4, which downloaded 107.61 megabytes of data from the server and uploaded 25.83 megabytes of data to the server. So the download traffic does not differ that much. However, Battlefield 1 did send 48% more data to the server than Battlefield 4 did under the same conditions, which is surprising but not necessarily a bad thing, as DICE might now be able to send larger data packets to the server since they are no longer bound by the networking restrictions of the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. So most players know that a multiplayer shooter needs a high tick rate in order to feel responsive and provide a good hit registration. But what many do not know is that it's not just about how many calculations or ticks a server does per second, but also how long it needs to finish such a tick. When a server runs at a tick or simulation rate of 60, then this means that the ticks are 16.66 milliseconds apart. So when a tick happens, then the server processes the received data, it runs its simulations, sends the results to the clients, and then sleeps until the next tick happens. So the faster the server finishes a tick, the sooner the clients get an answer, which reduces the net lag of the players, which is something that I tested and demonstrated in one of my older Battlefield 4 videos. But it's not just about the delay that players experience in the game. Once a 60 Hz server gets close to those 60 milliseconds, you will also begin to see issues in the game like delayed hits. And once it goes beyond 16 milliseconds, you will encounter quite game-breaking issues, like rubber banding or missiles stuck in midair, as the server is then failing to run 60 simulations per second. Now, how long did it take the Battlefield 1 server to finish a tick in the closed alpha? To find out, I analyzed an hour of gameplay that I recorded on a full 64-player server while I had the netgraph enabled. What I found was that 11 milliseconds were the longest time it took the server to process a tick. Most of the time the average was around 9 milliseconds, and at the beginning of the round it took the server 7 milliseconds to finish a tick. After that I repeated the same test in Battlefield 4, which shows slightly higher values under the same conditions. However, I found an interesting difference when the server was empty, because then it took the Battlefield 1 server 4 milliseconds to finish a tick, while the Battlefield 4 server finished a tick in just 1 millisecond. I'm not sure why that is, but it's definitely interesting. So again, the closed alpha of Battlefield 1 did not include the latest, improved version of the netcode, but we should be able to test that during the beta. Also, the game client and the server will see further optimizations by DICE, and Nvidia as well as AMD will release updated drivers that also affect the performance of Battlefield 1. Now, what is required to allow Battlefield 1 to provide players with a good online experience? First of all, the default tick rate must be at least 60 Hz on all platforms. No more 30 Hz or 45 Hz, 60 Hz must be the priority, because you will get used to slightly downgraded graphics, but not to the game acting up and feeling less responsive. The gameplay really has to come first. In this video I talked about the time it takes the server to process a tick, and that a 60 Hz server has a time frame of 16 milliseconds to finish a tick. Once the server gets close to that value, you will not only feel that the hit registration becomes less responsive, you will also experience game-breaking issues like delayed hits or missiles stuck in midair. Now, as I showed you in one of my older videos, the ping of a player has little to no effect on how long the server needs to finish a tick. However, what does affect the server's performance are players who have packet loss. A region lock does not help us here, because your neighbor might lose 20% of his packets due to a faulty router, while someone who connects to the server from the other side of the earth has no packet loss at all. What Battlefield 1 servers have to do is disconnect players who have a high amount of packet loss, as these can otherwise bring the server to its knees. You might say that this is unfair, but if your connection is broken, then the game does not have to allow you to stay connected to a server when this has a negative impact on the experience of everyone else who is on that server. We also need more locations where Battlefield 1 servers are hosted in order to provide players with low latency servers, which is especially an issue on console. A positive side effect of that is that you will then also reduce the amount of high ping players who still killed you behind cover in the Battlefield 1 closed alpha. Also, admins on console need to be able to choose from several hosting locations inside of a region instead of just being able to select a region, which is just not good enough. Another important point for console server admins is that they need to get support for third-party tools like Procon so that they can properly manage the server they pay for. Microsoft and Sony might not like the idea to provide an admin of a console server with as much power as admins of PC servers have. However, I say that the server rental on console is not very attractive without that kind of control. So DICE really has to push here to provide their community with what they need to be able to properly manage their servers. Another topic is that admins and communities want to be able to run servers where only low pings are allowed, or where they want to ensure that all players speak the same language. That can be achieved by using Procon and the High Ping Kicker or the Region Lock plugins. However, the downside of these plugins is that there is no way for the player to tell that these are active on the server, which means that he might get kicked instantly after he tries to join the server. To avoid this, the High Ping Kicker and the Region Lock features should be built into Battlefield 1, so that they can get exposed to the server browser, which will then hide servers that you cannot join. But it will also enable players to specifically search for a server that only allows a maximum ping of example 75 milliseconds, or only allows players from a specific region or country in case that the player wants to be sure that everyone on the server speaks his language. If you now fear that this will decrease the amount of servers that you can play on, then I want to point at my previous suggestion that Battlefield 1 needs many more server locations than in example Battlefield 4 had. Then there's currently an option in Battlefield 1 which allows you to disable the performance icons that warn you about packet loss, ping spikes or other things that have a negative impact on your experience. This feature really has to be removed, because when you hear an alarm, then the solution is not to turn the alarm off and proceed as nothing happened. You see these warning icons for a reason, and you should be interested in fixing the issue that causes them to appear. The only situation where it's okay to hide these icons is when you disable the entire UI to make screenshots or record a cinematic. But when you just play the game, then both the players and the developers must be sure that these warning icons will show up in every recorded gameplay that they see online, as these are a very important tool to troubleshoot issues reported by other players. What console players are surely happy to hear is that Battlefield 1 scoreboard finally shows you the ping value of every player who is on the server. However, the server browser is still only showing you the signal strength icon and not the ping value. That has to be changed too to allow players to know the exact ping of a server before they join it. So that is all that I have for you today, and I will keep you updated on everything related to the netcode of Battlefield 1. On my channel I focus on content that is informative and creative when it comes to my design concepts. My goal is that every video has some sort of value, which is why they take quite a lot of time to make and why they do not appeal to a very big audience, as they mostly deal with quite complex topics. As a result of that smaller audience and view count, financing this channel is a challenge. This will especially be true in the next few months, as I have to invest in a new graphics card, power supply, and a few other things that I need to perform my netcode and input lag tests in upcoming games, which get more demanding. Patreon is really the only way to finance a niche channel like mine. So if you like the kind of content that I provide here, then please consider to support me through Patreon. You can find the link in the description down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, subscribe for more, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris, and this was Battle Nonsense.